Well, greetings, everyone. It's great to be here again. Feels like it's been a while since at least I've been down here with all of you. Let's open up in a word of prayer. Father in heaven, thank you for this evening. Thank you for the gathering place that we have here, where we can all three congregations come together and meditate on a topic of great importance. Father, I pray that you will help me to communicate my heart on this. My heart is burdened and is heavy with truths that I know are from you, and I pray that you will help me to express them. Father, I pray that as we meditate on these truths, that you will help us to become more like Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen. So, I'm going to admit a little bit of a shameful fact about me. So when I was young, I have one younger brother. My brother and I watched tremendous amounts of television and movies, hours and hours and hours a day. So we probably watched, my guess is 3 or 4 hours a day, basically for our entire youth. And we watched certain movies again and again, embarrassingly so, and we were in particular fans of a movie series called Rocky, and Rocky is a series of movies about boxing, and they were movies that we watched dozens and dozens of times, and it got to the point where, this is no joke, Rocky 3 and Rocky 4 in particular, we could recite the whole movie by heart. We could start at the first scene and go to the very end and tell you every single line that every single character said, including, Rocky IV has got a Russian character in it named Drago, including the Russian. And to this day, I can say Russian because I memorized it from these movies. Pathetic, right? That's something not only we're trying to memorize it, we just memorized it. And there was a time that my brother and we were sitting in our living room, and he was being annoying to me, and I still remember I was sitting on this front couch, and he was right behind me, and I walked up to him, and I did one of those Rocky punches. I hit him in the face. There was blood everywhere, and he had a hole in his mouth. Like, my fist went through, and it connected with his tooth, and he actually had a hole in his mouth. And I was just mortified. I thought to myself, what did I just do? I'm not a person who has a lot of stories like that of me inflicting serious pain on an individual. But in this case, he was bleeding and bleeding and bleeding. And my parents were in India. We were with some other folks who were watching over us, and he kind of covered for me there. But I just remember being utterly mortified. I didn't know it at the time, but the watching of these dumb boxing movies made me do something I never thought I would do, which is to hit someone with that kind of force, to put my own brother a hole in his mouth. And I remember very well the rest of the afternoon, this sinking feeling, who have I become? What have I become? It didn't feel, it looks exciting in the movies when you see that somebody hit someone there, you hear that, psh, like they actually take a ham, believe it or not, they have a ham, and there's someone who's like slapping a ham to make that kind of a psh sound, and it looks really exciting when you see it there, but then when you see it in person and you see someone howling and the blood pouring out, it doesn't look so exciting anymore. I had been changed by what I saw in a very evil way. I suspect that for some of you, not all of you, but I suspect for some of you, you have been changed in very profound ways by the things that you have seen, by the things that you've listened to, songs you've heard. Probably everybody in this room has, I should say all the adults in this room, have songs memorized that you wish you didn't have memorized. We were traveling this weekend in Richmond, and in the airport we heard these songs playing on speakers there, and these songs that were songs from my high school, I remember just dreading that I knew word for word the lyrics that I was hearing in the airport. So my question as I open up this talk today about the topic of entertainment, we're going to be talking about entertainment, is what about you that you know about or don't know about that's maybe deep inside of you would you like to change? There are, like I said, for some of us, not all of us, but for some of us, we have been changed in ways that you didn't even know possible. I'm going to read a verse as we begin here. Paul wrote this verse. He says, "But we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as by the Spirit of the Lord." That's 2 Corinthians 3:18. So what does he say there? He says, we, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into that same image, that image of the glory of the Lord. There's a principle that is found throughout the Bible, which is that you become like that which you behold. So I'm going to make 3 points today that are related to entertainment, but they're all based on this central concept that because you become like what you behold, we should be gazing at the things above, not on the things below. Okay, so my first point is that what you consume becomes you. What you consume becomes you. So we all know this in the physical world, right? So like the things that you eat, the salad, the pizza, the hamburger, that actually when you ingest it, those molecules become you, right? That you become all those amino acids and sugars and all those things in some way become you. In the physical world, we all get this, that the things that we ingest in some complex way become embedded within our very cellular makeup. So just like what we eat or drink becomes a part of you, what you watch and what you listen to, that becomes a part of your soul. In some way, you're taking it in and it's becoming a part of who you are. Those molecules, those spiritual molecules are becoming becoming a part of your soul. So if that's the case, then we need to think very carefully about the things that we watch and the things that we listen to. I mean, music. I think all of us know the addictive qualities of entertainment, right? I'm not going to spend any time talking about that because we all know that. It was Aldous Huxley a while ago in Brave New World who talked about man's infinite appetite for distraction. Another author, James Smith, talks about how movies are, I love this expression, a pedagogy of desire. So the movies are a place where your loves and your longings and your identities are shaped. There's another person who's an anthropologist. His name is Thomas Zengoitidia, who says one of the reasons why particularly the new forms of entertainment are so addictive is that we are both spectator and star at the same time. We're both spectator and star. So think about, especially in a lot of the modern social media forms of engaging and why we're so hooked to that. You're both spectator. Think about that. You're spectator, you're kind of looking at lots of interesting things, but you're also in some sense a star, right? You're receiving attention from your ability to post. We all know the power of these phenomenon and how much they have drawn so many people into their zone. Now, one of the things that in the early church, there's a fascinating book. I don't know how many of you have read it, but if you haven't read it, you should read it. It's by Tertullian. He's got a great book. It's called On Spectacles. And On Spectacles is a late 2nd century piece where Tertullian tries to make the case that Christians have no place in the theater and in the area of worldly entertainment. And he gives several arguments. It's a beautifully written book, which I encourage you to read. And one of the things that he says in this is that the problem with the theater is that it makes sin look good, and it makes virtue look foolish. It makes sin look good, and it makes virtue look foolish. And he basically contends that when you participate in all of this, your affections are being transformed. That when you are looking at something that is sinful, but done in an interesting, creative way, a well-made way, you start to fall in love with it. And just like me with my boxing example, you look at something that looks really fun and powerful and exciting, well, suddenly violence has now been attached to me in some way. A guy named Wayne Wilson said, "A well-made but immoral film binds your affections to sin." I like that. A well-made but immoral film binds your affections to sin. So this is part of a very powerful strategy, right? So if this is the case, that what you see, what you behold, just like Paul says, when you behold the glory of the Lord, you in some sense become like him, you're transformed to him. When you behold and consume sin, you become attracted to, you become bound to sin. You know, one of the phenomenon that several people have commented on about why the U.S. has had such a profound change in its attitude towards homosexuality. There's several authors that I think have converged on fairly similar explanations, plausible explanations for this, is that these forms of entertainment have, in some sense, first made the whole realm of sexuality something to laugh at. You know, isn't it interesting that you know, if you can take something that's uncomfortable and you can first laugh at it, it erodes in a very profound way your sensibilities towards it. You can take things that were unmentionable or sacred, and when you start to laugh at it, it makes it something that is now at least talkable and interesting. And bit by bit by bit, something that was once unthinkable now becomes something that you can discuss and entertain, and ultimately something that you admire and something that you practice. There have been studies, particularly on homosexuality, that have looked at how it was once something, and I remember very well these shows from when I was young, that took something like that subject and they first introduced it in a couple of shows. I won't even mention what they are, but it was something that was so out there and so strange, but they portrayed it in a way that was laughable. And it was like, aha, look at this. But the characters were very lovable and very, very interesting, very engaging people. And then slowly it became normalized, and more recently, you know, now it's just an utter avalanche, right? I mean, you can't, you know, not that I watch these things, but I've been struck at how much collateral material is coming through these channels. I was reading an article in the news about the Women's World Cup, where the U.S. won the World Cup, right? So big deal that the women's team won this soccer match. And suddenly this becomes a platform to talk about homosexuality. And these characters now that are so admired and everyone is so enthralled with are pushing their agenda on homosexuality. Like, you think at one level, what does sports have to do with sexuality? Well, there you go. You begin to ingest this in a secondary but no less palpable way. All right, second point is that no value should take precedence in our lives over holiness. No value should take precedence in our lives over holiness. Our commitment to holiness is first. Everything else we do is secondary. So in Hebrews 12 or 13, it says, without holiness, what does it say? Without holiness? Yeah, no man shall see God. No one will see the Lord. It is impossible to see God. The Bible does not say, you shall be cool because I am cool. The Bible doesn't say you shall be relevant because I am relevant. The Bible says you shall be holy because I am holy. You know, one of my main gripes with the evangelical world that I came out of is an inability to detect idolatry. I'll say that again. One of my main gripes with the evangelical world is an inability to detect idolatry. So, you know, it's interesting, right, isn't it, that think about Israel. Think about the history of Israel. And you had all these people in the Old Testament who would repeatedly bow down to Asherah poles and various images and statues of different gods. And you wonder, how can this possibly be? How could this be that the people of God would repeatedly fall prey to idolatry? Well, it's actually a lot more subtle than people think. So we won't turn to the story, but we all know the story of Exodus and the mountain and how Moses is up there getting the law, and he comes down, of course, and what does he see? He sees the people bowing down before the golden calf, right? And they're worshiping this golden calf. And it's very interesting what Aaron says. What Aaron says, you probably don't remember this, but what Aaron says when he makes these calves is he says, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." He doesn't say, "Hey, you know what, Israel, we're going to go worship the cow god and the calf god." He relabels these statues as, in some sense, portrayals of Yahweh. And that's a lot more insidious form of idolatry, because you could imagine someone saying, "Yeah, you know what? God made the cow. We're going into the land of milk and honey. Cows make milk. And in some sense, I can see God in this cow. There's something redemptive in this act of idolatry that I can see is meritorious of worshiping it." And I'm convinced that throughout the Old Testament, when people fell prey to idolatry, what they were really doing is they were actually relabeling these deities as some sense as servants or as constructs of Yahweh. That's a lot more subtle, but I think far more accurate given what we saw with Aaron. In the 1970s, there was a phrase that grew to be very popular in the evangelical world due to a couple of authors that I won't mention. So you know, like the traditional Christian community was always a little bit hesitant around entertainment. You know, so you go to places like, you know, Wheaton College and places like Bob Jones and you know, all these kinds of colleges. They would say, "We don't go to movies. We don't do that same level of entertainment." But in the 1970s, there was a sea change that happened in the evangelical world, where all of a sudden, communities that were traditionally a little bit distance from that world said, and here was the phrase that was bandied about. The phrase was, "Art needs no justification." Okay, it was actually one of Francis Schaeffer's sons in particular who started to say that. Art needs no justification. And the line was that if it's art, then somehow it gets a pass, because art is in this category unto itself. And the word that also got thrown around was, we can find something, here's the word, redemptive in that art, right? So you can look at the most vile, ungodly movies, films, television, and say, "Oh, but I see something redemptive in that." And that makes it okay. Now at Biola, which is a Bible college in Los Angeles, they now have a course where they show intentionally some of the most depraved, wicked, sinful movies out there, and the goal of the course is to find redemptive themes and activities in these movies. And it sounds very sophisticated, doesn't it? It sounds very sophisticated. Yeah, we're about art, and we're looking for what is redemptive. I think this is why we have, and by the way, this is now the mainstream standard way to think about the whole domain of television and movies is like, no problem, just watch all the same things, just watch it with a Christian lens and try to pull something out of it that's redemptive. Like, this is what I grew up hearing. That is very similar logic to what the Israelites employed in the Old Testament. Well, you can bow down to Molech or Asherah, but just make sure that you can see past that, the redemptive features of Yahweh in this, because Yahweh is the one who is the ultimate, so a lot of these gods were the gods of the weather or the god of fertility. And they would say, yeah, we know that Yahweh is the ultimate giver of life. We know that Yahweh is the ultimate cause of the weather. Something like that, right? And so this is how the people of God got fooled, got totally fooled. So this point that our holiness is the most important feature of who we are is something that I want to address particularly with regard to our children. So I think we have a little bit of an interesting dynamic here where a lot of the adults have a lot more exposure. When I say adults, I mean like greater than 20 years old, have a lot of exposure to a lot of evil, and a lot of the adults here have partaken in things that the children here have not. Okay, and what I want to do here is encourage especially the children to value that. There's something in all of this that I'm always so weary about, which is in talking about even these stories and making these allusions to movies and shows, is that can create a kind of an envy, and it's like, oh, I need to experience that too. So I want to dispel that right now. So there is a special strength and there is a special power that comes from purity that I really want us to understand here. So I'm going to give an analogy. So Jesus used a lot of analogies from nature, right? He talked about yeast, he talked about plants, he talked about leprosy, and I'm going to kind of riff off of one of his analogies here, which is this analogy of sin like disease. And sin like disease is pretty powerful, right? So you see this in the Old Testament, you see this in the New Testament, especially associated with these infectious skin diseases. Well, the term leprosy was an umbrella term back then. It didn't just mean what today we call Hansen's disease. It was a reference to a wide variety of diseases. There's a common disease that a lot of us here in the room have had, which is different flavors of herpes virus. So herpes has many manifestations. So one form of herpes virus gives you cold sores. So I don't have cold sores, but I'm sure some people in the room do, where if you're stressed out, you get these cold sores that pop out in your mouth. And they're these kind of painful blisters. There's another form of herpes, which is chickenpox. It's the same virus, a different family, different number on the virus. And chickenpox is something that now they have a vaccine for. They didn't have it when I was young, so I got the real chickenpox. What's fascinating about herpes virus and about chickenpox is that, and the whole herpes family, is that this virus, once you get it, what the virus does is it has a mechanism to cut your DNA and insert itself into your DNA, and it lives in you for the rest of your life in your spinal cord. Okay, so like right now as I'm standing here, I have herpes virus DNA all up and down my spinal cord that I cannot get rid of. And it will be there till the day I die. And what this herpes virus, this chickenpox, is waiting for, it's waiting for a weak moment. If you are tired, if you get a disease, if you are immunosuppressed, the virus that lives in your spinal cord, the chickenpox, comes out. What's it called when it comes out? Shingles. It's very painful, right? You get these bands of blisters. It's very painful disease. That is exactly a picture of sin, particularly in the entertainment world, where when you see images, when you listen to movies, pornography, all these things, it goes into you and it stays with you. You may try to forget it, but it's there. It's there in a corner of your mind. And it is waiting for a weak moment to come out. You're tired, you're discouraged, you're angry, The images that you see, you will take them into your wedding bed, your marriage bed. You will take them till the day you die, right? And if we could see, people like me, you would see, if you had the ability to look with a microscope, you would see all these viruses, right? If you could see spiritually, for me, because I'm a person who had similar worldliness that I voluntarily took in, you would see a very broken spiritual background. But in a lot of you children, we would see purity. We would see a whole intact cell unmarred by the ravages of this virus. And that is an incredibly valuable asset to have. This means that you will not have a lot of the same struggles down the road that many of us adults have, and it will give you the ability to have a special power. I often think about in this area of purity with my children, and I so badly want my children to be victorious in all the areas that I was not. And I think about the example of Samson. Samson was a person who, we won't get into this in great detail, but the whole picture of the Nazirite vow and everything there is about communicating that to be, in a sense, unspotted, to be pure, gives you a kind of supernatural power that cannot be manufactured or engineered in some sort of way. Okay, so I want all of the children when I say children, everyone 20 and under who has not had all this exposure, to value that and to fight for it and to guard it and to defend it, because, as I said, these are irreversible states that you will enter into once you consume these things. One of the other points here, so thinking about holiness, one of the other points that Tertullian makes, I'm going to put it in my words because it's stated a little bit in a confusing way in there, is he makes this argument, and again, I'm going to say it in a slightly different way, but let's do a thought experiment for a moment. Let's just pretend that someone were so amazing that they could just consume all the filth out there and it would not touch them. Now, that's impossible, but let's just assume that we're the case. There's another dimension of holiness that we ought to consider, which is, what responsibility do we have to the actors and the performers and the people that we're patronizing and encouraging to do the various activities that are in these films and movies and television? What are we asking them to do? So, if any one of our wives here were to be sitting here in this front row, and some stranger were to come in and they would start kissing and making out, we would all be horrified. We would all say, what in the world is happening? This is shocking. But if you put lights on them and put a camera on it and pay them, all of a sudden, it's art. And it's beautiful. And everyone's like, oh, this is amazing. I can't believe how touching this scene is. This is the kind of foolishness that we have, and this is Tertullian's basic argument. He says that we have, through this whole realm of entertainment, we've created this huge double standard where things that we would never allow, we would never want, we would never dare to contemplate, if you label it art, all of a sudden, I love it. It turns from one zone of hideousness and wickedness to cherished and beloved. I'm going to give you here a great, great principle that I think about this often as I contemplate this whole question. Jesus said in Luke, he said, what is highly exalted among man is an abomination before God. What is highly exalted among man is an abomination before God. Okay, so right there, Jesus has given all of us an incredible, just shorthand way to rule out things and quickly eliminate things. So I think about, let's use some simple examples, okay? The Super Bowl. Okay, so the Super Bowl has got to be, at least in the U.S., probably like the day that everybody has to watch football, right? Like that's just the day, and everyone watches the commercials, and it's a whole big thing. Well, according to Jesus, what he says there, what is highly exalted among man, something like the Super Bowl, what can we say with a very high degree of confidence? We can say that it's an abomination before God. This one rule alone, okay, think about the world of professional sports, the millions of dollars that these people get. Think about all these shows that everyone gets all excited about and talks about. Whenever you hear that kind of chatter, whenever you hear about something that's buzzing and that's popular, I want you to immediately recall what Jesus said and say, you know what? What's highly exalted among man is an abomination before God. That's a very powerful principle that we can use. Okay, third and final point. Recognize the competition between entertainment and the things above. Recognize the competition between entertainment and the things above. So somebody has, I'm going to paraphrase it again, but somebody has said that the purpose of Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TV, movies, all these things will be to show on the last day that prayerlessness was not because of a lack of time. So on the last day, we're going to have this incredible exhibition of how much time people invested in all those things, and it will be abundantly obvious about how we are, where our priorities were, and what we did with prayer. You know, it's very interesting, isn't it? The word television. So think about that word, television. Okay, I know a lot of people don't watch traditional television anymore, and I know with internet and all that, you don't need it. But the word television actually means, so vision, we know that, and tele means like far away, right? So it gives you this ability to have a vision of things that are far away. Pretty simple. There's a verse in Proverbs that talks about how the fool, his eyes are over the whole earth, but the righteous man has his eyes right in front of him. So one of the things that I'm going to challenge everyone here to think about is, are you focused on what is local, what's right in front of you? When I say local, I mean your family, I mean your church, I mean your neighbors, or are you just all over the place? Are you televisioning yourself all over the place? There's a definite competition, isn't there? I mean, we all know this. We all know that there's a huge competition to, hey, I can stay up late and watch something foolish on YouTube, or I can invest that time in prayer and Bible study, talking to my wife, spending time with my children. And consistently, one of the phenomenon that we have all probably seen or experienced is that there is a very powerful escapism at play in all that. Right? What is the escapism? The escapism is a very simple one, is that, are you bored with the conversation in front of you? I'm going to whip out my phone. Are you tired of some annoyance in your house? I'm going to go on my laptop and surf the web. Is the lecture in class uninteresting? I'm going to sign on to my favorite website. Entertainment has always served as a way to escape from the inconveniences of life into a world of pleasure. And yet, paradoxically, what this escape has done is that it has made us to be fools and slaves. There's another line that I really like, which is that the basic concept is that our soul kind of shrinks to whatever it is that we're consuming. It shrinks to the pleasures that we're consuming. And so if you're consuming small pleasures, trivial pleasures, your soul kind of shrink wraps right around that. And you become far less enthralled with the greater beauties of life. It becomes much more difficult for that person to enjoy nature, to enjoy the Word of God, to enjoy prayer, to enjoy family. While so much of entertainment promises so much, it offers so very little. Most people have been totally and utterly conned by a bad trade. I'm going to read just a little bit more here, and then we'll close in just a moment. So this is a quote from an author named Renke who says, "Two theaters compete for our gaze, the theater of sin on earth and the theater of glory where Christ is. These divergent auditoriums represent two outlooks. In Colossians 3 and Philippians 3, Paul talks about the earthly as the special theater of sin. The earth is the present theater that dominates the public gaze, but it represents an age that is being undone and ended. The heavenly is the present and future theater, and it represents a new creational age, which is breaking out in Christians and in the church now and will ultimately globalize when Christ returns." I'm going to conclude with Tertullian. I mentioned him a couple times here, and the early church stance on this. So his book title is called On Spectacles, kind of an interesting title. And spectacles can mean eyeglasses, but it can also mean something that captures your gaze. If I say, that's a spectacle, he made a spectacle of himself. That means that person made a show of himself. He acted in some outlandish way. And Tertullian laments. He grieves over these Christians that have been seduced by these weak and false spectacles. And he says that they are, quote, sighing for goalposts, the stage, the dust, and the arena. So he's weeping over these Christians that have been fooled over these false spectacles. And his argument is a fascinating one. His argument is that in Jesus, we have the ultimate spectacle. And that our call, our vocation, is to continually be putting our gaze on the cross, on Jesus, on his work. And then ultimately, and I'll read you another quote from the line, he says, "But what a spectacle is already at hand, the return of the Lord." I love that. So in this argument that he makes here, he says there's all of these baubles, all of these trinkets, all of these spectacles all around you, but our job as followers of Jesus is to put our eyes, to put our ears, not on the things of this earth, but on the things above. Let's close in prayer. Father in heaven, I pray, O Lord, that we would not be seduced by the charms and the false entertainments of this world. Father, I pray that we will be a people of prayer, a people who set our minds on things above, not on things below, that we will recognize the idolatry, that we will see the con game that is all around us, that we will not be fooled by the attractions and the spectacles of this world, but that we will instead be drawn to the beauty of our Lord. That as Paul said in 2 Corinthians, how he said that we are beholding the glory of the Lord. Father, I pray for all of us that we would have a hatred for the things that are exalted among man, because Jesus, you taught us that these things are an abomination. And I pray for our children here. I pray that they would not be seduced by the things of the world, but they will cherish their purity, their holiness, and that they will surpass those of us who are riddled with spiritual viruses and who are riddled with damage from years of sinful choices that we've made. Father, I pray for each of us to strongly desire to contemplate afresh the beauty of Jesus, his work, his teachings, his crucifixion, his resurrection, and ultimately the second coming. May our hearts be attuned to the greatness of his work, the greatness of his person. I pray all these things in his name. Amen.